The Chinese people hoisted a Chinese trader high into the air, stripped off his clothes, and sliced his flesh with knives. In the distance, a group of Americans stood on the shore, witnessing everything unfold. The trader endured a fate worse than death and eventually begged the Americans to end his suffering quickly. With no other choice, the Americans aimed a gun at him and pulled the trigger. When the U.S. military arrived in Changsha, China, countless civilians began hurling vegetable leaves and rotten eggs at them. However, the American soldiers dared not retaliate. After the Republic of China government was established, it began reclaiming various privileges that had previously been granted to the U.S. Army. To avoid public backlash, the Americans could only hide aboard their ships. Meanwhile, Chinese civilians raised protest signs written in English, demanding that all remaining Americans on land leave immediately. Fishermen hoisted the flags of the Republic of China. When the U.S. military needed supplies, Chinese fishermen blocked their shipping routes. The Americans did not dare use force, knowing that if any Chinese civilians were harmed, the incident would escalate into an international conflict. As a result, they could only use high-pressure water hoses to drive the Chinese fishing boats away. Eventually, the Americans managed to land. However, upon reaching the U.S. Embassy, they discovered that the American flag had been taken down. The U.S. officer protested angrily, but the Chinese side responded, "This is Chinese territory." According to Chinese law, they declared, "We have the right to requisition this place." With no alternative, the Americans were forced to return to their ships. Yet as soon as they attempted to leave, Chinese fishing boats once again surrounded them. It turned out that the fishermen had discovered the Americans were secretly producing opium, and they were determined to trap them on their vessels. Chinese laborers working aboard the ships also defected, jumping into the water one after another. With no workers left to operate the ships, the Americans were rendered helpless and remained stranded until winter arrived. Some American sailors later tried to sneak off the ships at night to seek pleasure with Chinese women. After spending the night ashore, one sailor never warmed up again. He froze to death. When his companions attempted to retrieve his body, the Chinese discovered what had happened and beat the Americans in fury. As for the assaulted Chinese woman, overwhelmed by grief and shame, she took her own life. The surviving American sailor fled back to the ship in disgrace. Soon, increasing numbers of Chinese surrounded the vessel, demanding that the Americans hand over the murderer to face justice. The sailors confronted the troublemaker. Exhausted from being trapped aboard the ship and terrified of provoking the Chinese, they pressured him to confess. The standoff dragged on as more civilians gathered, and the situation spiraled out of control. Left with no other option, the American commander brought the culprit onto the deck and loaded his gun, prepared to suppress the Chinese crowd by force if necessary. The commander wanted to protect the man, but the other sailors demanded that he be handed over. Some even pointed their guns at the commander, shouting for him to put his weapon down. His subordinate, fearful of worsening the situation, lied and claimed their guns were broken. Furious, the commander seized a gun himself, but in the end, he fired only a few warning shots into the water, hoping to intimidate the Chinese.